Good morning, good afternoon, everyone who's joining us today, or even good evening if you're coming in or good middle of the night if you're dialing in from the United States. I'm going to wait a couple of moments to let everyone spool in. Right, I think we've got most of the people we'd expect to be coming, and there are over 300 people registered for this meeting, but we will see how it goes. Um, Welcome to this ETOA webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by David Edwards, ETOA's own statistician, Scott Huang from G2 Travel, one of the giants of wholesale travel worldwide, but particularly from Asia coming into Europe, and Wolfgang Arlt, who should almost need no introduction. He's very much the doyen, has been the doyen of matters Chinese coming into Europe for more years than either he or I wish to actually raise, but there's quite some time, let's put it like that. If I could have the slide about showcase, please. Um, Lo, who's sitting in the background. The purpose of this webinar is both to educate and inform on the Chinese market, but also to promote the fact that we've got our new entire month devoted to China, which is the Showcase Outbound event, which is taking place in May. And it's going to feature a whole series of online discussions. Also, a roadshow in China going from Guangzhou to Beijing to Shanghai and culminating at ITB Shanghai in May. So, this is going to be quite an extensive event. It also includes some online marketplaces as well. So, if you want to know more about that, by all means, look on our website. There's quite a lot of information there to be found. Thank you very much, Lou. Um, I'm now going to hand over to David to give us a bit of statistical background. Things have been happening in China and we need to know what's been going on. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. So, good morning, good afternoon, hello to everybody. So, as Tom mentioned, I'm going to be giving you a bit of a statistical whirlwind through what we can say about the Chinese market from a data point of view. So, let us start with a few slides talking about volume, value, and trip characteristics for the market. If we begin by looking at outbound expenditure, so how much do those who live in China spend when they're traveling abroad, going back around about 3 decades, we can see that things really soared during the 2010s. Notice, though, that actually it's 2018 rather than 2019 that was the peak year for expenditure, at least measured in billions of US dollars. And we can then see that gradual recovery post-pandemic. Now, back in the mid-1990s, China was not even in the world's top 10 for outbound tourism expenditure, whereas today it is number one, despite in 2024, which is the last year for which I've got full year figures, it hadn't quite got back to where it was. Once we do get 2025 data, it absolutely will have got back to 2019. Potentially, it will have set a new record last year. What about the volume of visits to Europe? So this is data based on analysis from tourism economics that is released every 3 or 4 months by the European Travel Commission. And what we can see is back in 2019, there were an estimated just under 15 million visits from China to Europe. That in 2024 had halved to around about 7.5 million, but tourism economics also project through the next few years. And we can see that by 2029, it's reckoned there will be close to 20 million visits to Europe from China. But it's worth noting that only about 1/10 of outbound travel from China at present is destined for Europe. And although tourism economics reckon that that might edge up as a share to around about 13 or 14% by 2029, this really does remind us that the bulk of outbound travel from China has been, is, and will continue to be to places within the Asia Pacific region. So that looks at 2024 and projections to 2029, but clearly we're now in 2026. So it would be good to say just a few things about 2025 from a European perspective. And it was something of a mixed picture. So during the first 9 months of last year, arrivals from China were, at least in aggregate terms, 21% up on 2024 across those European destinations for which data has been published. So it will have been for the most part, good year in 2025 compared to 2024. However, the less good news is that for more than 4 in 5 European destinations, they're yet to see arrivals from China recover to where they were back in 2019. And it's some of those larger destinations, the likes of France and Italy and the UK, that are definitely still to recover to 2019 levels. Whereas there are some destinations that perhaps starting from a low base, so it's easier to have strong growth rates, but the likes of Montenegro, Serbia, Slovakia, and Poland are all reporting really strong growth in 2025 versus 2024. Let's have a couple of slides based on Dragon Trail research analysis. And this is from a survey, so it's not about the entirety of the market, but it's a really good lens on outbound travel from China. And here we're looking at the distribution of booking lead times. And what we can see is that close to 2/3 of outbound trips from China are booked less than 2 months before travel. Equally, if we look at the duration of outbound trips from China, what we can see is that a hefty 45% are lasting 4 to 7 days, and then we've got a bit close to 1/3 are lasting 8 to 14 days. But what is this really telling us? Well, it's telling us that very many outbound trips from China are relatively short duration. And that would be true if we were speaking about North Americans. It would be true if we were speaking about Europeans and their outbound trips. So most outbound trips tend to be a week or so, perhaps in duration. And again, this is because so very many of them are intra-regional as opposed to inter-regional. Now, I do have a thing for demographics, so let's have a few slides on demographics. And there is a lot of folks who live in China. Here we're using data from the UN with estimates from the year 2000 and their projections through to the year 2050. And we can see a gentle incline and then a gentle decline. But the values on the left-hand upright axis, they're big numbers. So what is this telling us? Well, it's saying that China's population has peaked, and in fact, it's India that is now the world's most populous nation. And these UN projections suggest the population of China will decline by 150 million. Yes, that's a decline of 150 million over the next quarter century. But the share of the population of China that is aged 60 plus, well, that is set to increase from around about 1/5 now to 2/5 by 2050. Well, let's reconfirm that it is around about 1/5 of the population today that is aged over 60. So that's the green and the grey shaded bits of our little pie chart here. But we can see that at present, there's good chunks of the population who are in younger age cohorts. However, the growing number of elderly, and compared to many countries in Europe and North America, the very generous pension provisions and benefits represent a key challenge for China over the coming years. Let's look at the most populous cities in China, and all of these are roundabout, if not considerably more than 10 million in terms of their population. I know it's worth saying that were I to include New York on this chart, it wouldn't actually make it into this top flight of Chinese cities. But what is also worth saying is that many of these very popular cities in China have very limited direct connectivity to places in Europe. Some of them perhaps no direct flights to Europe, perhaps underscoring the opportunity there is to grow outbound travel to Europe from the regions of China rather than just those really well-known source markets such as Shanghai and Beijing up at the top of our chart. A few words on economics. So over the last number of decades, the average person in China has been getting better off according to IMF data on GDP per capita. And we can see that by the line creeping, well, not really creeping upwards, going upwards at quite a rapid pace. But that's just the average. It's worth saying that there are clearly many in China who cannot afford international travel. However, there are also many whose income is somewhat above average. And according to Capgemini in 2024, China was home to about 1.5 million high net worth individuals, so those with wealth of more than $1 million US, while Knight Frank estimate there to have been 427 whose wealth exceeded 10 million US dollars. So what does that mean? Well, it means there is absolutely a luxury market for Europe to tap into in terms of outbound travel from China. So those who want to have a chauffeur-driven experience, those sorts of things, there is a very, very sizable, rich outbound travel market from China. Now let's look at the share of global GDP accounted for China. And again, that has been going up at a right old rate of knots, much to the chagrin, of course, of some other leading global economies. Now, while it depends on the exact measure, most economists do agree that China is, or very soon will be, the world's largest economy. Let's look at recent and forecast annual economic growth, again based on projections and estimates from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the height of these bars would be the envy of many governments around Europe, with growth rates typically in the 4 or 5% region. But what we can see is that from 2023 through to their projections for 2026, the bars are getting shorter year on year as the growth rate in the Chinese economy is slowing. And it's worth saying that China faces a number of headwinds over the coming years. The tariff uncertainties, which have again reared their head today, an aging population that I've already referenced, and indeed a debt-laden property sector. So yes, strong growth rates, but definite headwinds in the coming years. Let's look at trends in consumer confidence in China based on OECD analysis. And we can see that things got really buoyant in the late 20-teens, then fell dramatically in the last few years, starting to edge up, but not quite back to where they were pre-pandemic. One of the criteria that helps people decide where am I going to go for my international trip and how much am I going to spend when I'm there is the exchange rate. What we're looking at here is the cost of a euro for those visiting from China since 2005 right through to the end of last year. And what we can actually see is that there was a period in the early 2010s when it was definitely getting cheaper to come to Europe and buy euros for those in China. But we've had a reasonably long period of stability. However, we can spot right over on the far right-hand side of our chart that during much of 2025, it was getting a little bit more expensive to buy euros for those visiting from China. Now, you might have a good deal of income and you might have an appetite to visit Europe, but what can we say about connectivity? Well, this chart is looking at seat capacity outbound from China in October of last year, October of 2024, and October of 2019. A range of insights emerge. First insight is that the nations that are very much dominating at the top of this chart are those places across Asia that those in China tend to visit. Another insight emerging is that in many cases, October 2025 was definitely not back to where it was in October of 2019. Next insight is that we have to go a long way down this chart before we start to see European destinations. Towards the bottom there, we've got the United Kingdom being the most connected European destination from China in Europe. And then a bit further down, we've got Germany, we've got Italy, and we've got France. But what we can also note is that only 17% of seat capacity to from airports in China is international, the other 83% being domestic seat capacity. However, it's that international seat capacity that is growing faster than is domestic seat capacity. So that's a good news story. But what this chart also does is it underscores the importance of geopolitics and trade in terms of connectivity. Because back in October 2019, the USA was the 6th in this league table. In October last year, it had plummeted down to 14th. And now this is data, as I say, for October, and I don't have the exact figures from OAG for this January, but their analysis suggests that since last October, Japan has tumbled from first spot down to 5th on the back of other geopolitical events regarding comments made by the Japanese Prime Minister regarding Chinese Taipei or Taiwan. So again, reminding us that geopolitics does, particularly from markets such as China, play a role in the level of connectivity. Let's look at the evolution of the number of daily flights between China and Europe. So we're looking at 2019, 272 was the average number of daily flights. That in 2023, 196 by 2024, up to 283. And now again, I don't have the final 2025 figure, but summer seat capacity from China to Europe was up about 7%. So it's very likely that the figure for 2025 will be a wee bit higher than that 283, but not dramatically so. But let's give it some context. So by contrast, on a typical day in 2024, there were 1,088 flights between the USA and Europe. So the US has about 1/4 the population of China, but it has roughly 4 times the number of daily flights. So again, perhaps reminding us of the opportunity or the potential to grow connectivity to Europe from China. What about visas? Well, there are a handful of European countries that offer visa-free travel for those coming from China, including the likes of Serbia and Albania. But for the most part, those from China wishing to visit do need a visa. So a Schengen area visa will cost 90 euros, and that allows for stays of up to 90 days within a 180-day period. If somebody from China wants to come to Great Britain, well, then the cost of a 6-month visa is £127 sterling, and that's equivalent to about 146 euros. Bit of a bargain, though, for a single entry visa for a Chinese national wishing to visit the Republic of Ireland. Well, that will just cost them 60 euros and is valid for 90 days. Let's finish things off by talking a little bit about motivations and preferences. And I'm going to give you some analysis from a big research study done right around global markets by Visit Britain 2 or 3 years ago. Let's start by looking at which things those in China consider as extremely important when they're deciding on a destination. So what do we find? Well, is a good place for relaxing, resting, and recharging was the phrase that got the highest level of people saying, yeah, that's extremely important to me. Just a little bit ahead of there is a good variety of food and drink to try. Then there is beautiful coast and countryside. It has to offer good value for money. It's a place where I can explore history and heritage. Lots of famous sites that I can tick off. Good towns and cities to explore, and is a welcoming destination. So what this is really telling us is partly it's about, well, what will be the things that I can see and do, because those matter. But it's also about some of those emotional benefits that people will get from visiting a destination. So the stuff, will it be relaxing? Will it be somewhere that I can actually enjoy and taste new food and drink? The same study also asked, well, how interested are you in doing different types of activity when you're on a foreign trip? And as we would, I guess, hope and expect, there's a good deal of correlation between those motivating factors because the types of experiences that those in China would really want to have while experiencing coastal places and scenery, 77% say they have a high interest in doing that. Exploring local food and drink, a little bit down, 75%, level pegging with visiting those iconic tourist sites. If we go a bit further down, we can see that shopping appears on this list as being an important activity for many of those in China. Let's round things off by looking at holiday inspiration sources. And what we can see here is that social media sources, whether that are things such as influencers or others sharing information online, very much up at the top, but also what those in China are seeing in terms of social media from their friends, family, and colleagues. So, really important. Imagery, unsurprisingly, up towards the top. But notice this continued importance of national tourist boards. So, there's absolutely a place in the market for inspiring those in China when we're looking at what it is that the tourist boards and cities across Europe are saying. So that's a raft of data. It's worth me reminding you that the ETOA Insight Hub contains lots of market intelligence and summaries of a whole raft of different reports. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand back to those who really know about the Chinese market. So back over to you, Tom.
David, as ever, that was a amazing tour of the horizon in terms of what information there is out there and what we need to understand about China. I think I might well just cut straight into it. There are a number of questions raised by that, and by the way, everyone in the audience, please post questions in the chat. I know someone's already done so and then retracted it, which is entirely understandable. But there's Q&A and a chat function. It really helps everyone, it helps the conversation go vibrantly if you can post any questions you may have. But Scott, I suppose I'm going to turn straight to you, if I may, and say, look, you're very much at the sharp end. You're sitting in Beijing. Do you recognize a lot of what David has said? And I'd be very interested to know how you felt 2025 went and what you think the prospects are for 26. I think you're on mute, Scott, if you can unmute yourself. Well, while we're there, I'm going to turn around to Wolfgang because Scott, we've got a minor connection. Wolfgang, I mean, and do you agree with that general analysis of growth? And do you have any perceptions as to what things are going to be like next year or this year?
Yeah, yeah. So, well, first of all, of course, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually sitting here in Kathmandu in Nepal, but of course, I'm a German, so I'm a European. Very happy to work and well, Tom and me have been talking about China for, yeah, as you said, decades. And so it's good that this conversation is going on. And of course, no, David, thank you so much. I think this is was a really very insightful tour de horizon. Indeed, and of course, I agree with that. The point, of course, is as usual, and well, you know that perfectly well, that there's always the danger with averages that we put very distinct groups of people together in one average. And I think this is one of the things which is now more true than ever before in China, that you have very different kind of animals when you talk about the upper end of the market and maybe the less rich people. And but maybe one point I just want to take up is, David, I share your interest in demographics. And I think just to give one example, what has changed in China is that in the last 10 years or so, the number of marriages and the number of babies born has halved. compared to what it was a decade ago, which for demographic development is a crazy speed. And so I've been being close to China. I've been 6 times last year in China, and each time I've been talking, especially to younger ladies, asking them, do you intend to get married? Do you intend to have a baby? And almost all of them are saying, I probably will not get married, and I never ever will have a baby because you have now a generation of well-educated, self-confident young ladies who were single childs. So they were given all the attention, all the support in their education, which before might have gone to the brother if there would have been several kids. But so therefore, we see now, and this has a lot of changes as a result. So we have less families with smaller kids traveling also to Europe. We have more groups of girlfriends, of ladies in their maybe mid-20s, traveling 4 or 5 girls or young ladies together. And also we have more older people, so 60 plus people who used to be grandparents, spending all their time and effort and money on the grandchild. And now there is no grandchild, so they can spend the money on themselves. And they will do this in many ways by traveling. So I'm sure Scott has better numbers for that, but I saw that, for instance, the number of elderly or best ager couples renting a limousine with a driver and driving around Europe with chauffeur driven has increased 10 times for some of the OTAs and companies specializing in that in China, so that you can see that there is this demographics alone is triggering a big change, and and of course the economics, the numbers you presented are the official numbers. There are a lot of people who are questioning if China really has 5% GDP growth, or if this has been a little bit on the optimistic side. And certainly I have to say I've been traveling in China many times, and especially from the 90s until the pandemic, there was always a strong optimistic basic groundswell. So people say, "Oh, life gets better every year. I don't have to save money. I will earn more money next year. I can spend all my money," and spending a lot was seen positively. Now, actually, everybody is anxious. Everybody is careful. Everybody is saying, "Be frugal is something positive now." So, conspicuous consumption is not earning you kudos anymore. So this has changed again completely. So I think from what I can see, and I think David, your numbers have been showing this as well. So you have a very big change in what are the characteristics of these different groups of Chinese outbound tourists, and so we have to relearn what we knew about what Chinese outbound tourists do and want when they come.
Stop.
So I will stop here. So
Okay,
I'm sure
thank you,
we can.
Wolfgang. I'm very keen. Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yes?
hear.
Oh, great. Okay. I was just
Yeah, yeah,
the question because we lost connection a moment ago. I was just
yeah,
wondering
yeah.
how
Sorry about that.
2025 was for you, and how what do you think the prospects are for 26?
For the next year, sorry, for this year,
Yeah,
26,
yeah, for this year, yes.
I think the overall market will perform better comparing with last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is one issue I want to mention here about the resources in the European destination.
And
Yeah, because yeah. So after the pandemic, many hotels are closed, and many drivers they change their job to move to the truck driver or something like that, and so this make the resources quite limited for us. It's not only for China but for the whole travel market here. And another point is, I think due to the flight issue, because China, I should say, all the other markets like US, Japan, Korea, they will have the travel plan earlier than China. So normally they will book all the service in advance, ahead of us. So it makes us more difficult to get the proper resources for our groups because currently more Chinese groups have more specific requests about the hotels. Yeah, this is the situation that currently we are facing.
It is an interesting problem, and as you're quite right, it's one shared by the inbound market as a whole for Europe. That it's taken a
Yeah.
long time to adjust from the problems that were caused by COVID. But you're saying that you're still having difficulties sourcing the product that you need for the market at the price that the market wants. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Is there any we know that the problems between Russia and the Ukraine at the moment have seen
Yeah,
a dramatic shortfall in the number of airline carriers, certainly European airline
yeah,
carriers, carrying people to and
yeah.
from China from Europe. And we've seen, and this is one of the anomalies, is that we've seen that the Chinese airlines have moved in and increased their capacity to Europe. Um, is there, I mean, firstly, is there a resistance to coming to Europe because of that conflict? Or is it simply because the flight times on European carriers are much longer and more expensive?
No, I think because of the both reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
I
you
think
think that there is, yeah,
yeah, currently most groups will travel with domestic flights like CA, something like that, right? So for foreign airlines, they quit the market for too long. So even after they come back, it will take time for them to get the market share. And also, I think the cost is another point that they will consider. So we just don't know when and how many foreign airlines will come back to China.
I think we're awaiting the so I'm almost just drawn into making a political statement there, but I was saying that we are awaiting the long
Yeah.
anticipated peace that is going to break out. That the current president of the United States would be achieved very quickly, and it may yet be achieved
Mhm.
in the short term. And if it is, I think the one thing we can all four agree is that this will be good news for traffic from Asia, and particularly China into Europe. No, I agree wholeheartedly. The, um, I was intrigued, actually, David. If I could just turn to you for 1 second,
Mm.
is my understanding right that when you say that when you look at the Chinese figures to see that there's this huge outbound movement, it includes the traffic from the mainland of China to Hong Kong, Macau, and Taipei. Would that be true?
It would indeed be true. So we have to keep that in mind that it's, I guess, to use a very parochial analysis, it would almost be the same as saying we can treat travel inbound to Great Britain from Northern Ireland or vice versa. So as being international, whereas it is brought in, many would argue that is entirely domestic. So yes, we do have to take account of the fact that a slice of that travel is to special administrative regions of China.
Okay, so
if I may
Wolfgang, you
jump,
have an issue with that?
if I, David, Tom, if I may jump in. So this is true for Hong Kong and Macau. So about
All right.
47, 48% of the trips go to Hong Kong and Macau SIRs. It's not true for Taiwan because there's still almost no traffic, very limited numbers, a few 100,000 going to Taiwan. That is different from what it was before the pandemic. Again, political reasons. So therefore, but for Hong Kong, Macau, SIRs, yeah, it's almost half is going there. And so if I may support what Scott has been saying before, so I think it is, of course, connectivity is a problem, but the quality of the product, I think this is the key thing, of course, as always, because we can see the split in the market. You have those people, as David has shown, who are now not getting richer anymore so fast than before. So real estate market as a main source of additional income is not longer there. So we see what we can call the upper middle class rather staying in Asia and spending less money and going shorter time and going just to Vietnam or to South Korea, and until recently to Japan, but also now to Laos, for instance, a big market moving up, Malaysia, Maldives. So these people now not come to Europe anymore, and we have less new people climbing up the social ladder so that they are able to afford to come to Europe, because less people are now getting member of the upper middle class. And on the other end, we have the very rich people. You mentioned the 1.5 million HNWIs. So we have maybe if you put the barrier a bit lower, so we have probably maybe 50 million people who are really rich in China, and they travel in style, and they have a lot of experience now in traveling, and they are very much demanding for specialized, customized, personalized service. And I don't see that the majority of the European tourism industry is prepared to know and to how to do this in a way that the Chinese discerning travelers are really satisfied, and that they might then say, okay, let's try out something else. So I think this is something where Europe has been catering a lot to the middle ground, and now the middle is thinning out, and you have the people who are the poor rich staying in Asia, and the rich saying, "Oh, I want to have something really special, and can I get this in Europe?" And not everybody is well prepared for that.
Scott, do you agree with that? I think the point being made was that there's going to be an increasing there's going to be an increasing demand for FIT business, upmarket FIT business in China, and that's going to grow more considerably than the middle ground. And that and the point I would make is that running an FIT program, particularly for high net worth individuals, is an entirely separate discipline from most of what the travel industry is used for. I mean, there are specialist companies doing that, but I would have thought that even with an exaggerated 4% growth, there is still scope for people in the middle section to be growing. But I mean, you confident that the I suppose the group tourism market in China, which is what we're talking about on one level, is there and is growing. I think our connection is slightly problematic.
I guess if I chip in there, I guess, yes, even if 4% is really 3%, that sort of tells us that there should be many millions of Chinese who are getting better off in real terms at the present time. However, I think, as Wolfgang was saying, and as the consumer confidence chart revealed, there are many in China who are now a lot more cautious than they were 5-6 years ago, not to do with COVID and those sorts of issues, but more to do with what's happened with the real estate sector in China. Many of them are now wondering, well, is this property that I invested a lot of money in really worth as much as I thought it was going to be? There are also very many who thought they were buying a property that just hasn't been built or is half built. So even if their bank balance is still going up year on year, their perception of how wealthy they are and how much they can spend on discretionary stuff, such as long haul, which is what Europe is, international travel is somewhat diminished, and they might be thinking, well, yes, I still want to take a holiday, but I will go to Malaysia or Thailand or wherever it is, because that will cost me less money and still provide me with an experience that I am seeking.
Yes, I can throw in one number. Last summer, 12 million young people got a university degree and left university. 12 million people, out of which 1 million, maybe 1.5 million, got a proper job on the level of qualification they have. And the other 10 million end up in being a JD driver, driving meals and groceries around on their e-bikes. So that is one of the things which is biting into the confidence of the people. Yes, and as David said, I've been traveling a lot around China in high-speed trains, looking out the window, and you can see two things. One thing is a crazy amount of infrastructure investment. Wherever you look, there's a new bridge and a new highway and a new railway line built. So the government is investing massively in all kinds of things, especially infrastructure. At the same time, you see a lot of half-finished department blocks which obviously have been not worked on for years. So because there's no money to finish them. And indeed, people have paid for an apartment which has never been built. And they paid this with a bank loan in most cases. So therefore, yes, I think this is exactly the point. The mood has changed in China. People are not gung-ho optimistic anymore, and they're more careful with their money. And that, of course, is including traveling.
Wolfgang, I mean, there is a shift in sentiment, and these things are notoriously difficult to measure. But I buy that. I'm much more interested in, I say, almost of what there is there. I mean, we can look at a glass half empty, but I'm absolutely intrigued because on one level, the demographic changes which are occurring, and with respect to everyone, Europe is not a destination that traditionally aims itself at the youth Chinese market. This is something that is a slightly more mature destination, certainly because it's an inexpensive destination. And it's not entirely bad news, as David was pointing out, that we've got this demographic shift. If you've got and this is actually a global point. It's certainly a point in Japan. It's definitely a point in South Korea. And it's definitely a factor in Europe and North America that we're going to have a lot of people with a lot of time and a lot of money in a category that's very interested in the sort of products ETOA is selling. So I buy the fact that there are huge challenges being presented by the demographic shift, but there are opportunities, and they're not non-existent. I'm much more intrigued about visas, and David, you raised that point about visas, and you said that there are some countries which have shown real growth from China, and the standout ones undoubtedly were Montenegro, Albania, and Serbia. These are the three countries, of course, that do not require visas for Chinese nationals arriving. And I noticed that President Xi actually paid a visit to Serbia, almost in recognition of the number of people who are traveling from China to Serbia. I'm always almost would speculate, is what would demand be like if there were no visa restrictions? If Europe had done what the Chinese have done brilliantly, which is turn around and say, look, if you're coming for a short time in China, don't worry about the visa. We can achieve that at the border. Scott, is a visa a real problem for you when you're selling Europe to your clients?
No, currently I don't think visa is an issue for us.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because for example, take the Western Europe destination, for example, the Chinese groups will apply French visa, Italian visa, some Netherlands, Switzerland, or a German visa. From my point of view, I don't see problems from the agents as long as they have good relationship with the embassy.
Crucial point.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the moment it's going very smoothly at the moment. Is it an issue with the UK? The fact that you need another visa for the UK, does that act as a
Yeah,
block
yeah.
on? It does. Yeah, I thought it might.
No, no,
Um,
no, no. I think for UK destination, visa is not a problem. The biggest problem for UK destination is the cost. The price for UK destination is higher compared with other European destination. So maybe it's difficult for the travel agents, to collect enough packs or travelers for this kind of group. So it's quite the figure is quite dramatic. Take the winter business, for example. The packs collection situation is quite poor for the UK destination compared with other European countries. The exchange rate, the cost, and everything. I think
it's
like
what
what David just mentioned. Yeah, like what David mentioned, people will spend their money very carefully currently. So they will pay cheaper money for other European destination where they didn't have a chance to visit, rather than the UK.
that's a fascinating insight, I have to say. I mean, because conventionally we've been saying that visas represent a barrier, and the fact that Serbia and Albania and Montenegro, none of whom are, how can I phrase this, very high up on the bucket list for prospective visitors to Europe, have been doing exceptionally well recently. Wolfgang, I mean, is this something that you would? I mean, but you're at the sharp end, so it's very important to hear that. Wolfgang, is this? It was my assumption at the beginning widely shared. I think would be the right way of phrasing it.
Yes, of course. No, I think as Scott has been saying, of course, it is visa means you have to plan longer your trip. You cannot do anything spontaneously because you have to apply for a visa. It costs some money, so it's inconvenient, but it is probably not the killer thing. So if you really want to visit Europe, then you will come with visa or without visa. It is rather the point that, of course, if all in all the things David mentioned, what people are interested in China now, that they have been through this shopping and sightseeing phase, which is now petering out, and people have more experience and they know better what they want and what they're interested in. And especially when we talk about adults, so 50 plus, who have some better idea about what they want. So Europe has to offer a lot in terms of course, culture in the wider sense. So we are very well placed for that, much better than I don't know, the United States or whatever, whoever is the government there. Just we have more tangible history and stuff. But the point is, are we able to offer this in a way which is a way the Chinese want it to be presented to them and given to them? So that is a point. So the raw material is there.
Mhm.
But I think there's a lot of things to learn that because when we talk about somebody who is 55 years old in China and has a lot of money, that person probably either speaks English or at least is able to use all these apps which give you a translation, oral translation on your smartphone. So the language barrier, which was a big reason why people are traveling in a group and not as a FIT, has gone. So I was at a conference recently, and we had a round table talk, and there were two Chinese colleagues who had limited English, and they were just talking in Chinese into the machine, and it was speaking English to us. And when we were speaking English, they could read in real time the Chinese translation and characters on their phone. So this problem has more or less disappeared,
Well, it
unless
is there, but it's modified. I think. Yeah,
and yes, and no, and just one more point, technology. So AI We have to mention that if we want or not. So there is the question to find exactly what I'm looking for. So with all the new personal assistant things coming up, and which are in China much more advanced than we have them in Europe. So it becomes easier also now for the Chinese to say, okay, I'm interested in I don't know, Shakespeare. So when I go to the UK, where can I find the traces of Shakespeare beyond the theater building in London and Stratford upon Avon? What else is there? So they will have an app telling them in all detail. But then the question is, are these places prepared for the influx of Chinese visitors who say, okay, do this in the way I want it? So that is clearly. So I think Tom, we agree that Europe can only profit from this more mature in many ways demand. But so we just have to get our act together.
Well, that's an interesting thought. The good news, those of you who share my mild skepticism on AI, is that if a Chinese visitor was to ask what the traces are of Shakespeare outside the theatre in London and Stratford upon Avon, if the AI says that there are any traces of Shakespeare outside those two areas, it's lying. So there are no traces of Shakespeare anywhere else. But that's neither here nor there. That's a byproduct of my having a qualification in English literature, for which the only career was tourism, rather like the many people in China who are emerging with degrees and finding that the only job available is the tourism industry. We always have jobs, Wolfgang. I've got some questions here, which is great to see. I don't know if any of us got the answer to this. David, you might be able to shed some light on it. And do you have any figures about how many of the Chinese tourists going to Europe are booking on digital platforms? Do we know this?
I'm sure in the what's it called, Dragon Trail Research, there is some data. I don't have the stats to the top of my head, but I'm sure that their survey does ask about booking channels. So
right.
That might be in a longer version video that I did for ETOA a few weeks ago. But so yes, there is some evidence out there about how those who are traveling outbound from China are booking.
And I think the good news is the person posing this question, and indeed most of the people on this webinar, are members of ETOA, so they have free access to the Insight Hub, where you can find that information from where we posted the Dragon Trail research, I believe. So I think that's available, and if you write to me again, we can actually give you that information if you can't find it. The other question we have is more of an assertion, really, that they think that the current antagonism with the United States, I don't want to get too drawn into this, is a big win for all the other destinations. I question whether such antagonism is a win for anybody, but I would actually just see, Scott, do you have an angle? Is the situation with the United States at the moment proving that people are turning around to you and going, actually, we're going to Europe? Is that a driver for you?
You mean for US?
Yeah. Are people saying, I'm not going to the US, I'm going to Europe?
Yeah, it happens.
It does happen.
Because, yeah, not only about the political situation, but also about the visa issue. Because the country, the visa rejection ratio is quite high for the US visa. Yeah, so it's quite difficult for agent to apply group visa. So normally, we'll apply the individual visa instead.
That's a very interesting point, because notwithstanding what you said about Europe, and we buy that. I think it was a very good point, or a very perceptive point, new point. I think when it comes to other countries, a visa is not, the mere existence of a visa is not exactly a welcome sign. And if you've got a difficult visa, then that's a very, very bad welcome sign. And I can see that would be a problem. Do you think this is the case, David? I mean,
I guess, yes. So when we're thinking about getting into a country, there is the potential barrier of the financial cost of the visa. There is the potential barrier of the level of information you need to provide and the bureaucracy of getting that visa. And we're yet to see, because the US is consulting on this, whether or not they will make things even more difficult for getting an ESTA and visa to come to the US in terms of probing your family connections, your use of social media, all that sort of malarkey. But there is also and this can sometimes be anecdotal, that people hear from their friends, relatives, or in the media, but about, well, how will you be welcomed when you actually arrive at the border? What will that process be like when you first interact on the border of the place that you were visiting? So it's not just the finance and the bureaucracy, it's, well, what is the perception of how welcome or otherwise I will be made to feel when I rock up at passport control with my passport? So I think it's a blend of all of those things that might either make people think, yeah, I'm quite keen to go there, or do you know what? It's a big old world and there are lots of other places that I can choose, rather than a destination that there is a perception will not make me feel welcome.
Yeah,
Well,
I can give an illustration. I'm living in a country now in Nepal, where since January 1st, if you have a Nepal passport, you have to put a deposit of 15,000 US dollars into a bank account before you can apply for a US visa. And if you are denied and they can show that you did not give full documentation, you might not even get it back. So 15,000 US dollars. So that is, I think there are now 35 countries in the world which have been slapped on the wrist by USA in that way. So yeah, so Tom, I fully agree with you that visa is, especially for short-term leisure tourism visits, is a very stupid idea and very counterproductive idea. And so that is something clearly for the USA. We just remind yourself that, of course, a lot of people traveling to the USA because they have relatives there, or they have business there. So therefore, I would think that certainly you can see the number of leisure tourists going there just for fun or for shopping is going down a lot. But those people who visit their relatives in California, they will still go to California because that's where the relatives are, and not come to Europe. But of course, we will have some benefit from this, but probably not. It's not so dramatic.
I don't think it's a zero-sum game, tourism. I don't think if one person loses, the other gains. It's a short answer. Look, gentlemen, audience, thank you so much for paying attention. What this has really illustrated is that this is an enormous subject. We haven't covered the regional diversity of demand in China. We haven't covered future patterns of demand, though we've intimated it. We haven't looked at shopping, which we ought to do because it's a very important factor, both for the Chinese visitors coming over to Europe and those people who were anticipating a return to the shopping levels that we saw back in the late teens. I think there is much to discuss, and it will be discussed during Showcase and the prelude to it. So it's really down to me to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Scott, for joining us from Beijing. It's been great having you. Wolfgang, thank you for joining us from Kathmandu. We're an international organization. And thank you, David, for joining us from the borders of Wiltshire, I believe. It's been very good of you to be here. And thank you, last of all, and again, audience, for taking part in this event. I look forward to seeing you soon on the same subject, because we're going to have many such topics, such discussions in future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Namaste.
Bye.